I'm Julie Dickerson. I'm one of the co-leads for the Read and Read event. One of the reasons we wanted to have this event is, for one, I'm from Northern Anne Arundel County, and I loved growing up here. I live here now. One of the things that I admired about being a resident here is the family, and just having ancestors and having my mom and my grandparents. And my mom went to Bates High School, which was one of the the only segregated high schools in Anne Arundel County, which was in Annapolis. And so I found that when I went to grade school and high school, I went to school with Gaithers and the Hines family and everyone. And we were all connected through our parents and our grandparents. So one thing I admire about Anne Arundel County is that we're like a family. And I think from learning from all the great speakers here that we have on NACAC, you will get to see why this is true. But this is one of the reasons why we selected this book. We just wanted everyone to get familiar with living here and this rich history that we have. So with that, we're going to go to Ms. Pat Caldwell, and she's going to give a little bit of history of the NACAPs and all their activities. Thank you.
We are a 501(c) organization that was started in 2005 at St. Mark United Methodist Church in Hanover, Maryland. And our first president was Miss Betty Williams Mack. Our mission is to collect, document, preserve, and share the contributions of African Americans in the history and culture of Northern Anne Arundel County and Maryland. Our vision is to engage the communities in Northern Anne Arundel County in discovering, preserving, and sharing accounts, artifacts, genealogies, legacies, memorabilia, and oral histories that will provide a comprehensive cultural narrative of African American lives in the history of our county and state. We have had exhibitions at Banneker Douglas Museum, our first, Bates Legacy Center, the Mormon Tabernacle Visitor Center in Kensington, Maryland, Baltimore, Washington, Thurgood Marshall Airport, Chesapeake Arts Center, the Benson Hammond House, and Anne Arundel Community College. We have had many products and outcomes. We have historical books, the one that we're reading tonight, drama presentations, drama DVDs, oral history DVDs, Voices of Legacy articles in the Maryland Gazette, many quilts, and historical tours of various enclaves in the Northern Anne Arundel County. We had a truck farming roundtable at the Lincecum Library. We hope you have enjoyed or will enjoy reading this historical book of African Americans in Northern Anne Arundel County. Thank you.
Our organization began as a thought in the mind and the heart of a historian. That historian, Irene Butler Hepburn, was a member for 50 years, more than 50 years at St. Mark Church, but during that time, she served as both the church secretary and as the church archivist. And because of that, she had many things, and you can see her on the right screen with the blue turtleneck on, smiling. She had many things that she had collected. There are several just hold up. I don't know if you can see them. This is actually a horn, a trombone, looks like a tuba, but I think it's a trombone. There's a world map. These are things that you would find in a classroom. She was a teacher for many years. There's an old lamp that had a wick in it that provided the light in the schools when she first started to teach, because she first taught in a Rosenwald School.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jelani Dickerson. I'm a resident of Humphrey, one of the enclaves in Northern Anne Arundel County. If you were to drive down Bell Grove Road, which you may not know where it is, or 695, you would see a sign say Welcome to historic Pumphrey community. And we're very proud of that, because that is where one of the Baltimore and Annapolis short line ran through in 1887 into January 1950. Now, Pumphrey is situated in a great location. It lies only about 2 to 3 miles south of Baltimore City, 5 miles from Baltimore Washington Marshall Airport, and 45 minutes from Washington. So we're in a very good location. Pumphrey is divided into several streets, roads, avenues, extending east and west. To Pumphrey is divided into Belgrove Road, which divides the lowland and the bottom, as we used to call it. It was established in 1860, following the end of the Civil War, a major turning point in U.S. history. The war brought political freedom for many slaves. One such person who resided in Pumphrey, an early settler, Mr. Reynolds, was given his manumission papers, and the papers are now still being held by his great-great-granddaughter, Denise and Darrell. Now, I lived in Pumphrey, and I lived there quite a long time. When I moved in Pumphrey, my family moved from Baltimore City. There were roads, dirt roads, and families, mothers, fathers, children, and most of the families had 6 to 12 to 13 children. We got along so well as a group. When we needed something, it wasn't nothing to knock on the door and say, well, can I borrow a cup of sugar? And I'm sure a lot of you realize that. Now, one of the large landowners, Mr. Hines, purchased 97 acres of property from a Mr. Hammond, a white landowner. And he was able to farm part of that land and also sell some of the property to other people, families moving into the Pumphrey area. It was a fun, loving place. We're proud to say we had at least 3 schools started in Pumphrey. And if you look on the flyer there, the PowerPoint, you see the Pumphrey Elementary School, which is one of the Rosenwald schools, which is still standing. Prior to that, around 1901, there was another school, a smaller school off of Belgrove Road. I had fortunate to interview several other residents who attended that school. And they said it was a one-room school. It was practically a shack. Now, our property was owned by the school, the Board of Education, but the people and the parents built that school. And one of our oldest residents, Mr. Wesley Boo's sister, attended that school. I interviewed him, as well as several other residents who attended that school. And then the Rosenwald School, as you might know, was built from funds from Sears and Roebuck, a family. But the community also donated funds to have that school built. And you can see part of that school is a one-room school and later became a two-room school. Now, getting back to Mr. Hines, who owned the largest land, was the largest landowner in Pumphrey. He hired German Polish immigrants to farm his land. They came in off the ship to Fells Point in Baltimore, and they came and they were hard. They stayed in little huts on the property, and they farmed the land with corn, strawberries, beans, and vegetables such as that. Going further into that, getting back to the schools, because I think that's one of the most important aspects of the community, is the Rosenwald School, which was built in 1922, and out of the 23 schools that were Roosevelt schools that were built in the county, 10 are still standing, and they're used for different venues. And we're happy to say that we could walk to school. When I was in elementary school, it was maybe half a block. We eat lunch at school in the first and second grade, or we came back or to home and had lunch there. The teachers were like family to us. Yes, it was a segregated school, but our learning was of the utmost highest that anyone could have learned and got as far as academics in that time. I would say the school started in the first grade. That was the third school to the seventh grade. And at the seventh grade, most of us went to Bates High School in Annapolis, the only African-American school in Annapolis, and we took the bus there. We stopped along the way to pick up other students who lived in Furnace Branch and Queenstown area. The community, it was basically African Americans, and this community still stands until this day. The churches are closely. One of the churches was built in I can't recall right now. I don't want to miscount the date, but Ramsey probably could tell you more about the date of the church. So we had two churches in the community, and this is where we did a lot of our activities. The school started, the third school was a 4-room schoolhouse, and then it became a 8-room schoolhouse. And up until today, the community still stands. We enjoy the people, the harmony with one another. Now, some people will look at me and say, well, how come you live in Pumphrey today? Well, 2 reasons. One is my husband was from the Eastern Shore, Maryland, and I really did not want to move to the Eastern Shore because I noticed there were no lights at 6 o'clock. I mean, they didn't have any street lights. And I said, well, I don't want to be that isolated. So I talked them into moving into Pumphrey, and that's where we built our home. I won't continue. I'll turn it over to Ramessil, and maybe she has some other thoughts that she would like to entertain for you. Thank you.
Good evening. I am a resident of this community and have been for 73 years. My mother and father moved here from Washington, D.C. in 1947. One of the things that fascinated me was the first name for Pumphrey was Holly Run. And according to the land records in Anne Arundel County, this community was established in 1832 with 75 residents. Over the years, many businesses have flourished along Belgrove Road, and most of the business ran along the stretch of Belgrove Road and allowed its residents to be self-contained and enjoy economic growth. Mom and pop operations teamed throughout the community with sales of snowballs, stands, apples on the stick, homemade cookies, and fish or chicken dinners on the weekend. One of the earliest churches in the area began in 1852, and it began as the Holly Run Mission. This was later named St. John African Methodist Episcopal Church, eventually becoming St. John Methodist Church, and then finally St. John United Methodist Church. Community Baptist, the other church, began in 1929. Both churches provided spiritual growth, strong family fellowship, leadership development, and intellectual encouragement by reinforcing the value of education. These 2 churches still stand triumphantly after many renovations and rebuilding. Other denominations and churches have migrated to the area over the years. Entertainment in our community included dances and pool halls, community day special annual events, One notable beer garden, Sally Cook's, located on Shenandoah Avenue, and it became one of the gathering spots for African Americans throughout the 40s and 50s from Washington, D.C., Baltimore City, and across the metropolitan area. Clubs and other organizations for the children, youth, teens, and adults enhance the social fabric of the community with bowling clubs, baseball and football teams, Boys and Girl Scout troops, marching bands. As early as the 1950s, we enjoyed the Reynolds Parade, and you heard Yolanda mention the Reynolds household, and they would have a parade throughout the community. Drill squads, we had the High Steppers and recitals featuring community participants. These led to much of the uplift of the homogeneous and isolated enclave. Two major organizations, the Taxpayers Improvement Association, which began in 1923, and the Women's Progressive League, which began in 1930, continue to dominate, and they are very responsible for political awareness, maintaining the integrity of the environment, looking out for health concerns of the community, and economic stability of the businesses in Pumphrey. Taxpayers Improvement Association has been given custodial oversight of the Keyser Center. Where the Keyser Center sits now is the third Pumphrey Elementary School, which was built in 1939 on land donated by Mr. Charles Hines, and you heard Yolanda speak of that. The second Pumphrey Elementary School is the Rosenwald School that was located at 224 Berlin Avenue. And this was the Rosenwald structured school built with the funds by residents and Mr. Julius Rosenwald's fund. And this was done on the recommendation of Booker T. Washington in 1922. The first Pumphrey Elementary School was located at 6024 Belgrove Road. And one of the things that is still so important to the arts life of Pumphrey was the fact that most people had an upright piano. That was sort of like a staple in a lot of the homes here. So we could go from home to home and not only spin around on the piano stool, but we could also get to the keyboards. And so the community has had the opportunity to raise up a lot of great piano musicians. So, and they played other instruments also, but the fact that we had this rich musical opportunity right here in the community, and we had several piano teachers in the community and access to those kind of things. So, along with visual arts. So that was one of the things. But that's what I remember growing up here in the Pumphrey community. I'm proud to say I was able to raise my children in this community. And now I have opportunities to take my own grandchildren sleigh riding in the community and enjoy our great hills. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to remind everyone that you're welcome to ask questions either in the chat. We have someone monitoring the chat, or you can speak verbally as well. So just letting you know before we go on.
Queenstown got its name from the family of Asa and Matilda Queen, who had a large tract of land that spanned both sides of Queenstown Road. And of course, also the road named Queenstown. Several large families of Queens, brothers' families, lived on Queenstown Road. I chose to kind of look at some of the things that I remember from my childhood as highlights of living on Queenstown Road. The whole community would like share in different things. One of the things that I remember very well was on Friday evenings in the warm days of spring and the hot days of summer, the young men of the community used to like to show off their cars. They were car buffs, and they would get their cars all shined up, and they would ride from one end of Queenstown Road to the other. They would cruise along. There was no speeding. They would cruise along and they'd wave at the neighbors and the neighbors would wave back. And it would be a Friday evening thing to sit out on the front porch and see the parade of cars driving back and forth. And they would go down and turn around at Old Telegraph Road and then go back down the road again. So it was kind of like an entertainment for the neighbors. Another highlight that I remember was the baseball games on the field on Queenstown Road. You would think it was like Yankee Stadium because you could hear the people cheering and shouting for the players, and people used to come with their picnic baskets and their blankets, and they would spread their blankets out, and it would be just a wonderful family event. The small children would have their little games sometimes over on the side, but we kept the spirit of the baseball plus star game. And sometimes it would be just the community kids playing, and then teams that would come from Harmons and Dorset. Another little highlight, I didn't realize at the time that it might be something valuable, but the telephone pole at the corner of Queenstown Road and Camp Mead Road was the pole where they would hang the sign for the event that was taking place at Cars and Sparrows Beach. So if a big star was coming, like James Brown and Roy Hamilton and some of the others, they would put the poster on the telephone pole. And it would be a favorite thing to go over there and see who was coming next. Although I never got a chance to go to Cars or Sparrows Beach, but I did know who was coming. My older brothers and sisters got to go, but that was like a community highlight. One of the other things that was very significant to me was that, farming was a good livelihood for many farmers, but they also needed other work as well. Many of the community men worked at Fort Meade. So they had a job at Fort Meade during the day and then come home after working at Fort Meade, and they would farm, and then on the weekends they would take their vegetables and their fruit to the market. So they were like the weekend, they would be Arabs in the city and work at Fort Meade during the week. Everybody has a mention of Bates High School. Bates High School was a very significant part of preparing kids for a job after high school, especially the young ladies who didn't go to college. Bates had a commercial course. Commercial course taught typing. And if you learned to type well, as many girls did that took the typing course at Bates, after high school, they went right to Fort Meade and got a job and became stenographers at Fort Meade, right out of high school. And many of them, I can name a few in my family. Many of them, that was their career, being a stenographer. And to think that Bates produced young ladies who could type and do secretarial work. Some of these young ladies went on to Cortez Peters business school in Baltimore. And at Cortez Peters, they learned to do shorthand. Well, that was an advantage for applying for a job because that would give you a little step up because you knew how to take shorthand and you could type as well. Another opportunity that lended itself at Bates was the camaraderie communities. When you were speaking about Pumphrey and riding the bus, I can remember we used to slide over on the seat because sometimes the buses would have to go in have to double up on the buses and the other, making that long trip to Bates. One other highlight that I remember from living in Queenstown was every house during the wartime had to have blackout curtains. And the blackout curtains were to cut out the light at the time when we had the drills for in case of an air raid from our overseas enemies. When there was going to be a drill, you'd have to pull the shades down, dim the lights, and we had a neighborhood watchman, and he was Raymond Matthews, and he would drive up to each house, and everybody in the house, we would be very quiet because we were actually afraid. We didn't know whether something was going to happen or not. And the beginning of the air raid drill, they would blast the siren from Fort Meade. And when the drill was over, they would blast the siren again. So that meant then that the air raid was over, and Mr. Matthews would have driven around to each house to tell you whether you had too much light on or whether people were abiding by the drill. Mr. Matthews also had that building that we call the apartment building because there were apartments upstairs, but he had an ice cream parlor. And that ice cream parlor served as a social gathering place on the weekends, where you go and get ice cream and you listen to the music, and they had sandwiches and drinks, soda drinks, and people would go and have a place to socialize. They were very also politically connected because in the basement, Mr. Matthews had what was called a Democratic Club. And the people of the community, you know, when there were issues, they would go and have meetings and they would discuss the community problems and of course, trying to be a politician. And they would have sometimes very lively discussions, political discussions. I guess they were lively because kids didn't go. Grown-ups said. Remembering always that the church, the schools, and a good education were always very important to the families of the community. We all, you know, they use the expression, it takes a village. Well, in Queenstown, like many, all of our enclaves, the communities shared so much in common. It took a village. It took the people in the neighborhood, the teachers, people of the church to watch out for and to see that the kids of the community got a good, firm foundation. And we very often used to kind of have a quiet pride in Queenstown, from one end of Queenstown Road to the other. I was just counting, and Queenstown had pride in education, because I can count right off the top of my head 20 teachers that grew up and lived on Queenstown Road. That is really significant for a community, families that struggle to keep food on the table, to keep a roof over their children's heads, but to instill values of education and to raise families that did so much for their community. I think, well, I just covered a few of the things that I can remember about Queenstown, but I know that there are lots more. Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Tony Spencer. I am a resident of Annapolis now, but I was born and raised on Spencer Road. One of 8 children out of the 8, 7 of us were birthed by cousin Annie Guest. On Spencer Road and Howard Roads that cross over Marley Neck Road is where James Spencer, my great-great-grandfather, I'm the 6th generation, we're total now 8 generations of James Spencer. The land he bought was from Mr. and Mrs. Peter Young and Temperance Kirby, December 26, 1845. But the land was not deeded until March 10, 1846. James Spencer was among a number of free men who settled Freetown. And I just want to say those names, it's very important. William Howard, Nathan Owens, William Turner, Abraham Franklin, William Hall. These men and then other men later would be part of clearing the land so homes could be built. And it's very important to understand that the property that was bought from the Temperance and Young families, if you're coming from Glen Burnie High School on B&A Boulevard, you cross over Marley Creek Bridge. On around that cross over Marley Creek Bridge to the left is a bluff about a quarter of a mile would be where Smith's Forest was. That was the name of the property owned by the Youngs and the Temperance family. But when James Spencer bought it, it became Spencer's Wharf. Spencer's Wharf is where he parked his sailboats and where he loaded his crop. Mostly would go by sailboat to South Baltimore to the market. Sometimes it would go by one of his carriages by land. But James Spencer he and his wife Harriet had 12 children, 9 sons and 3 daughters. And the daughters are married into the Kess, William, and Turner families. But we're related to the Matthews, the Halls. There's a host of names. Some of them are on here now, Gaithers. You see on this picture here a Freetown school. And Freetown was, before they had the actual school, which was built in 1924, 1925, they had school that was in a building owned by the Masons. James Spencer and the Masons were men who helped build the community, names I just mentioned. This place was burned down. It was called the Templars Lodge No. 1. It was burned down in 1920. And I don't have information on where the kids went to school between 1920 before they entered in 1925. Lily Caldwell would have information on that. But I just want to say that James Spencer didn't always buy land by himself. He bought it sometimes with William Turner, with Mr. Howard in 1871, which is very important for the land that we're talking about. James Spencer and some other men, John Owens, Robert Curry, Pathan Owens, Edmund Franklin, William Turner, William Harwood. They purchased 1.5 acres And the purpose of that was to build a schoolhouse for freedmen and children to be educated. That came directly from the land deed when they purchased the land. He and these men would buy land throughout the county. By the way, that was September 20th, 1870. In 1873, James Spencer and 5 other men bought land. What we know of Elk Ridge, we see it as being close to Howard County. Elk Ridge extended down to, through Glen Burnie, down to just before what we call Crofton, which would be Waterbury, between Waterbury and Gambrills. And Elk Ridge came down that far. They bought the land from the Methodist Episcopal Diocese, and they paid $900, 1873. 1877, they sold the land back to the same owners under the same conditions for $1, which tells me these men, like many of our men and women, were community trustees. So Freetown is one school. Lily Caldwell could tell you more because she lives there. She's also knows some information on that. But I see the rock that you see there, and Bonnie Gaither Smith could tell you about that as well. This rock was built, if you're facing Hall United Methodist Church. Hall is intersected right across from there by Nabbs Creek Road. So if you're facing Hall, 1,200 miles from the 45-degree angle would be where this rock was located. Hall was part of Mount Zion United Methodist Church. Mount Zion was founded in 1859. In 1887, Hall separated from Maggie. They still a sister church, and they still had the same pastors. Was built. This rock was discovered in about 2006, but in a book done by some landscapers who were surveying the property for this new development, they found this rock and they found some other small buildings. And on this rock, which has JHH in the top of the rock, John Henry Hall. We believe John Henry Hall was the father of William Hall. William was called Old Man Hall, and Bonnie tells me that that was James Spencer's half brother. I don't know if that's for sure. On the front of the rock is a cross, and that rock kind of seared off because of large, if you see the dozers behind it, these large land rovers were going past it, and it seared off on an angle, but they got it back together. It is behind Hall United Methodist Church now. And you see the picture of Freetown. I wish Lily Caldwell could either ask in comment or questions could talk about Freetown Community School, because she and the family, the Caldwells, have done extensive work in the Freetown community, talking about community trustees. You see the sign that says Freetown is on Mountain Road, which is near the original Freetown Road, and just between that and the area that I called Midway, and that's where the Caldwell family lived. They still do. I'm looking at these pictures and trying to speak to them, but Lily Caldwell could add an enormous amount of information about this. So we don't have a picture of Magathie Elementary School. That was built between the years of Freetown being built and then Marley Neck. Marley Neck was built in 1927, 28. So between 25 and 28 is when Mount Zion Church had their Magathie Elementary School built. I'm going to stop there because I think I need to leave time for questions. And thank you for allowing me to share. But could I just add this? Most of our communities had dirt roads: Spencer Road, Howard Road, and Freetown Road. The community trustees there, Mr. Sherman Boyer, and I have the names here, but I don't want to flip through these pages trying to find it. And a lot of the community, Mr. Reverend Pierman, Clayton Green's grandfather, folks in Freetown who were the community trustees, and unlike Spencer Road was like in a U shape. Here's Marley Neck, and here's Spencer and Howard going around, who met together at a U. You saw who was coming in the community, you saw who was going out. And Freetown Road was all the way through from Mountain Road to Solid Road. So these men and these families looked out for the community. That's what we had to do during segregation. And so in the 1950s, I understand that Freetown Road got its first paving. And I think people know that Magathie, Freetown, and Marley, in 1959, first entered Freetown, the new Freetown Elementary School. Now there's a newer one than that, it's larger. It serviced those three schools then. I was there from 59, first 57 at Marley Neck, and then the spring of 59, we moved to the Freetown School. I graduated from that in 63. Hope that's right. Anyway. Yeah, my addition's not working right now. But I wish Lily could get on to add to this because of the work that she's done, the work that she is doing, and how much she's really helped. She's gathered information from Mabel Cook, who was the daughter of Sarah of Spencer Carter. I will say this, Sarah Spencer Carter and Jean Matthews, two ladies went to Annapolis to talk to they didn't have a superintendent then, but the guy was the commissioner of schools, to ask for one certified teacher. Until that time, the Black community had to depend on people who were readers or better educated than those who had none at all. And so until they had a certified teacher, that's how they had to educate their children. And maybe Ramsdale or Ms. Dickerson could speak to that as well. But I know that the school you see there is Marley. And I'll tell you a quick story about Marley. You notice that under the school, you have those bricks maybe 8 feet apart. And my first girlfriend named Sandra Mayberry told me one day in the first grade, Anthony, we had to go somewhere and kiss, and I ran away from him. But one of the jokes we had amongst ourselves. In the back of the school was the outhouses. I think in the front is a pump. Between the first, second, and third grades and fourth, fifth, and sixth grades in that school was where, in the front here, is where Mr. Taylor had his office. Mrs. Sarah B. Jones would visit us. She was the superintendent for Black schools. Mrs. Irene Hebron was my teacher in the first and the second grade, and we went to Freetown. Mrs. Henderson finished out the 59 from spring to June, and then Ms. Irene Hebron was my teacher again in the third grade. So I'm speaking from, I just finished a study for the superintendent and a great team to determine if George Fox Middle School, I'm getting off subject for a second, but you need to hear it, that the name of the school need to be changed. You're going to hear more about that in the community. That's something we just finished the study. And I just thank Ramsdale, Ms. Dickerson, those Marva and everyone who's educated, my cousin Vonnie, and my mind is going 1,000 miles an hour, who have been the examples, who came from Bates High School. They were I saw them as stars, okay, in the yearbook. They dressed with ties, they had dignity, and they were the people we looked up to. And so that carried us through the area, Marley, Freetown, Magaly, Pumphrey, Sabrina Park, Joneses. Those examples were the people that we still hold on to.
Just off of north of Ritchie Highway, just south of Cedar Hill Cemetery. That was an up and growing community years ago. That area was purchased years ago by Mr. George Williams. He owned that area of Cedar Hill down to what we call now the Beltway, nearly 100 acres. He purchased this with funds earned while working on a ship after he had been freed by the Hammonds family. He prospered as a farmer in the area with his wife and children, and he was instrumental in starting and establishing the John Wesley Church. That area up there had the forest, which was a lawn and park owned by Miss Maddie, and the Mount Calvary Cemetery, which was donated by one of the Williams descendants years later. Going south on Ritchie Highway, there was the William Armstead Bus Company. And Mr. Armstead used to drive students to Bates High School. Mr. Guilford Queen had a body shop in there. And Al's Bar and Pool Hall was operated by Al Hamlet. And further down was Hines Cleaners, owned by Mr. Herbert Hines and his brothers. In the Morris Hill area, there was Dr. Hunt, the Elroy Wilson's Funeral Home, Howard Hall and Martin Anderson, both were home builders. And some of their works are shown in many Black communities. Also in that area was Cooper's Nursing Home. And Mrs. Sarah Carter, who was a resident, was the first Black elected member of the Anne Arundel County Council. And in the early 1970s, the community acquired the county sewage for the Morris Hill community through their Improvement Association, which was headed by the president, Mr. Don Bessex. This property, they also acquired the Hammonds Farm, which was on Arundel Corporation Road, for the future use of the recreational area for the community. And in the late 70s, with the resource assistance of resident member Mr. Walter Waddy, who was a regional director of the AFL-CIO, the building of the rec began with then President Carl Brooks. Community members did a large portion of the work on that building. As we come down Ritchie Highway to Crane Highway, there sits Furnace Branch Church, which was later changed to John Wesley United Methodist Church, and the cemetery. And in that cemetery, Mr. Booth states that his parents are buried there. This church was started in 1850, and on the property stood the first Rosenwald School in northern Anne Arundel County, which was in 1878. Then the Furnace Branch Elementary School was built there around 1923, replacing the Rosenwald School. That building was mysteriously destroyed by fires. Later in 1960, the parsonage for John Wesley was built on that spot. Mr. NACAC's board member, George Gaithers Jr., stated that as a student at that elementary school, his job was to start the fire in the school stove for heat in the morning. The first superintendent of Black schools in Northern County was Dr. George Crawford, whose home was just below the church on Crane Highway. A building in his honor stands on the campus of Bowie State University. And across from Dr. Crawford's home on Crane Highway was the home of Dr. Maurice Dole. And in that area now stands the Patients First Medical Facilities. Brooks Ice Cream Parlor was between Crane Highway and Ritchie Highway and owned by Mr. Ellsworth Brooks. As we walk along Furnace Branch Road East, we passed another area of Black homes, including that of Mr. Benjamin King, who owned a school bus and who also carried students to Bates High School. King would purchase homes, renovate them, and then rent them out to the residents. Down further was some of the area of Mr. William Bill Dotson Jr., who owned the popular lounge of Dotson with his famous barbecue ribs and Dotson's Lounge. Mr. Dotson was the son of William C. Dobson, D-O-B-S-O-N, who later changed his name to D-O-T-S-O-N. This was according to information from Miss Vivian Hall Dotson. Mr. Dotson was also helpful in starting the John Wesley Methodist Church. I did not grow up here in Glen Burnie, although my husband did. And during the years of working with NACAC, Dr. Gaither, Betty, Tony, and the rest of the people of NACAC, I have enjoyed working with you and learning with you and enjoying the work that this organization is doing. Thank you.
Just quickly for our speakers, does NACAC have any plans to share this rich history with the students of Anne Arundel County Public Schools before we go to the quilt section? Anyone can answer, or all?
The last 15 years in several ways. Many of the social studies teachers, and especially during the time that Terry Poisson was the coordinator, were supplied with our two books. And by the way, the first book, of course, is Trails, Tracks, Tarmac. The other is Story Quilts, telling many of the same stories, but quilt by quilt. And the quilts were done for the communities, the schools, the churches, and the history of education. So yes, we do plan. In fact, we invited, and I hope that some of them are with us tonight, to join in and listen, because this is a format perhaps that they would like to have in addition to the books, to give them a sense of what these communities are today and where they have evolved from. There's been a lot of cultural development that has gone on that you obviously can hear as we talk about all the different communities. The answer is yes.
So next we're going to move on to our quilt section, our little exhibit. Dr. Joan Gaithers is on. She's going to speak along with Miss Betty Mack and also Miss Peggy on her quilts. And this is such an exciting segment, so I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Julie, really quick, we did have one other question from Katara West. Katara, are you able to pose your question?
Yes, it was actually just in response to Mrs. Mack's statement about partnership with Anne Arundel County Public Schools. And so as she mentioned, NACAC has partnered with AACPS. I work in the Office of Equity. And at this moment, we have formed a local history work group. And so in that work group, we have representatives from various organizations across the county to really bring to light this very rich history. I'm in the process now of developing a site where it's almost like a repository of information where teachers will be able to pull resources on, various topics. One of the things that we wanted to do was to inform community members about what the needs are in the school system. Here are the topics that we need. Here are, the gaps that we need to fill, and we need your help to do that. And so through that partnership, we have been able to, just in the few months that we've met, been able to get some very, very good feedback from community partners, and then use that immediately in the curriculum. And so over the next few months, we're going to be developing this repository where teachers and students can look up different local history facts in art, in history, in art and business and economics and education and all of these different fields that we're talking about, and really expand that across more than just social studies, but really across all the different content areas.
The technique I use, I call quilting from the soul. Start with yourself, tell your story, your personal story, because that's who you know best. And then like a pebble you throw in the water, as it ripples out, you tell the story of your family members, your community members. And when I threw the stone in the water and hit Anne Arundel County, Northern Anne Arundel, and the St. Mark United Methodist Church in Hanover, on your first slide, there's an image of the historian Irvin Gaither, who was a member of our church. He's a cousin. And he said to me, as an artist, you have to meet Miss Irene Hebron. And she is the historian, and she said she wanted to be sure that this history would not be lost. And as long as she was on this earth and had anything to do with it, it was going to happen. And it was Irvin Gaither then who said, well, I have to get you, Miss Irene, and Ted and Betty Mack together. They are visionaries. So that's really how this whole story quilt thing came together. This exhibit that came about, it was just sort of the coming together of an artist, myself, a historian, Miss Irene, and the visionaries, Ted and Betty Mack. And it was through this collaboration then that all of this exhibit came about. And as I started to do the community quilt, I realized I didn't know so much about the community as I thought. And so we extended the invitation. I had to say, as the community started bringing ideas and stuff to put on the quilt came like this quilt is 10 feet wide. I mean, it's 10 feet square, and it got to be a crazy quilt. And these folks had so much to tell in this community. And all I can say to you is that I had to say, we can't put any more on this one quilt. You have to tell your own. And all of the stories that my neighbors and friends and posse have talked about tonight, that's what's on those quilts. And you are able to see just the history of the churches, the schools, the railroad, the politics, the sort of Jim Crow things that were in effect at the time, but growing through it, making a life, sharing stories, inventing things, and making just life work. And in this are a number of 26 quilts altogether, but there are quilts to highlight the stories that you have heard already tonight. And there are the church quilts. There are 6 church quilts. There are school quilts, Frank Hebron Harmon, Wally H. Bates. They're the neighborhood quilts that you've heard about. So each one of these presentations tonight, along with others, will tell you about that. The family quilts, and I have to say that they look very complicated, but we were ready to put this exhibit up. It went up in November of 2006 through December of 2007. And we were having a practice sort of run through of what was going to go up that Saturday at St. Mark. And Lily Caldwell, Pat Caldwell, approached us and said, our Caldwell family needs to be in here. And they started on Saturday and created their family story. And I call it the first Black development in the county. And so that quilt and that story is there. And this quilt and these quilts were sort of the catalyst, if you will, for all the other quilts that you're seeing on the screen as we move through. It's about documenting the people, places, and events that are instrumental in the development of yourself, your family, and it goes into not just your community, your family, your church, the games you play, the history, politics, the heroines. And then it comes down to also being able to make something that is about your social conscience and things that you would like to do to make this a better place. So that's what we've been able to do. And since Trails, Tracks, Tarmac, all of the folks practically on your line here, I'm looking at them, have done their own quilts. So it has led, you talk about the inspiration and affecting other folks. My whole idea is to inspire folks. Tony Spencer and Vivian, to just look at how he documented the story of Freetown and in his family's quilt and all of that. I think I saw Lindra Pratt Marshall on there in one of the squares. You look at the social groups and women's chapters, the Northern Arundel County Alumni Chapter and the Delta Sigma Theta. I've done workshops. There's a quilt for one of the organizations or chapters in Baltimore for the link. So you just find some aspect of who you are and what your community group is. And you tell that story and you use anything and everything to highlight that. And it's amazing the number of quilts that have come out of Trails, Tracks, Tarmac, and the work that NACAC has done with that. So we all have a story to tell. I'm going to stop. If you have any questions, ask Peggy.
Well, I would just like to mention some of the other quilts that she did not mention. The Black Waterman's quilt, Meredith. He came in, he and some others, they came in off the boat. We were there with the quilt, and they came in and we gave them a needle and thread, and they sit down and put their stitches in that quilt. And of course, the 1864 quilt, Mr. Ted Max did his own square.
Yep.
It is amazing that the different people will put stitches in.
This quilt is about the signing of freeing the slaves in Maryland. It wasn't until November 1st of 1864 that Maryland slaves were set free. And on each square are numbers, one to show the folks who voted to keep slavery in Maryland, and the other number was for those who wanted to get rid of slavery. There was an equal number of folks who wanted to keep slavery, 1,611, and the same number wanted to get rid of it. It's about telling the story and the history and making it visual and making it so that folks can see it, and as well as understand what their connection is. We do a lot to get students engaged across the board through art classes, through history classes, through literature. And you know, this is Black History Month. And I would argue, treat it thematically and bring in all of the related stories and voices.
We are a bit over our time. I wanted to ask if anyone had any brief questions. And then I wanted to make sure that everyone is aware that after this event, you will be receiving an email regarding a survey for your feedback, comments about this awesome discussion. So does anyone have any questions?
I do. Will this be done again? Because it's too much information to gather in this one time slot. And if we had a series of ongoing information, it's just so much to add in a short period of time.
It is. It is.
It is. Yes.
That is definitely something that the committee will be discussing to entertain in perhaps, like you said, a series of discussions on this awesome topic.
I might say right now there's an exhibit at the Ward Museum in Salisbury, Maryland, where a number of the quilts that we talked about are on exhibit there. And that exhibit is open until the end of May. So that's where the 1864 quilt is, the Waterman's quilt. Those are all the big projects or quilt stories that were made by the awesome group of folks that are on here. So, and as always, I always like to just give a shout out to the posse, because the community is about that story. The community.
Oh, yeah, she would put her hands in it.
I'm sorry, Tanya, did you want to say something?
Wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah, I have a question. First of all, I just wanted to thank everyone who presented and the committee and everyone involved, because this was a phenomenal program. Just loved hearing all the history accounts, of course. Love hearing every time I hear about the quilting work that's done, and the community quilting, which I've had the privilege of working on, and it is all about community. And I just so thank everyone who's involved with this. Question for NACAPs. So you talked about the enclaves. We heard several of the enclaves give their history, representatives from those areas. I'm just curious, are there any enclaves that you don't have a historical background of, and that you're still trying to develop? Any enclaves in Anne Arundel County? And I know, Tony, thank you for connecting up Howard County to, Anne Arundel, in terms of like the Elk Ridge area and some of those areas where there's real connections, particularly down near the airport. And I'm just wondering, have all of those areas been fleshed out? Are you working on any projects to get more information?
I'll be very honest with you. Along with me, Mother's son, Irving, the Gaither family, not only in this area, but Howard and Montgomery counties. It's not just in, so there's so much to connect. And while I talked about James Spencer in Freetown, Freetown actually began what they call Spencer's Field, where I was born and raised. I haven't named the enclave of Spencer's Field, where Vonnie Gaither, Henry, and I lived, but were raised. But yes, there are a lot of areas. The area down off of B&A Boulevard, there's Scott Avenue and Henson Avenue, and they go around also in the U shape. We used to call that the bottom. That enclave has not been talked about. Marlin Lake, if you go out of Spencer and Howard Roads to make it right, there is Mr. Rufus Davis. There was Francis Edwards, and going further down were the Leveronis, the Whites, and Mahoney's. That was all still called Marlin Lake. But once you got past Marlin Lake, from their families and also the McDonald's, you would turn on the Sycamore, and that was a white community just before you got to Fort Smallwood Road. So yes, there are a lot. And sometimes you had a black community, a white community, and then another black community down in Pasadena. So yeah, there are quite a few. We named, I think we came up with 23 so far. There's probably another 23. We just have to identify them.
We also have gathered information on Jessup. It's not talked about, but we do have information on Jessup.
And Hawkins Point.
In Hawkins Point, yes.
Yeah, I think you'll find in our book references to other communities that are not covered. And most recently, we have been in conversation with the Wilsontown community, which is very, very old, leaded by members of the Quakers to 3 Wilson brothers, and it's a fascinating story. And of course, there's Sewelltown. We've done a quilt, but we have not developed that. Part of the reason being that it's more like NSA territory now than it is what was originally Sewelltown. Right. But there are a number of enclaves and communities that we have not covered. If we were true, we would be doing this every day.
Yes.
Every day.
And the other thing is Anne Arundel County changes the footprint of a lot of these communities.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
So one of the things we have to consider is of even Pumphrey, I think they called it Elkridge Run or something like that, and then Howley Run. So the footprint changes depending on what's needed for what, whether it's eminent domain or what have you. So one of the reasons why the Quilts and all of the endeavors of NACAPs is so significant is to grab the moment, to grab the time that is there, because even if it once was, it's still a part of our history.
May I also add something, Raymond, to Julie, to Deirdre, to the other younger folk? We need younger folk to come in.
Yes. Thank you. Every time I see Arundel Mills and what it did to Matthewstown and you know, all the
run.
Exactly. So, and I know I come out of Turner Station, Cherry Hill, and I'm watching them just eradicate the existence of where I grew up because they're slowly changing the name.
Yes.
And they've upgraded and put a marina in.
Yes.
I mean, so that area is called oh, I forgot, Middle River or Middle Branch or something like that. But the
Middle Branch.
Yes. And so the name of the communities are disappearing. So
Mrs. Irene and Miss Isabel were born, and for many years later, that area was called Harmons.
Yes.
And part of it was called Dorsey.
Yes.
All of a sudden, it's now called Hanover.
Mountain Road, and that was called Rockaway something before. Also, if you leave, go across the Mark Creek Bridge going back towards Glen Burnie, but turn right on Furnace Branch Road. Cousin Mabel Cook lived back there, and it's called Country Club. That was the estates, but before that, their property had some black families back there. And Don should be able to tell us something about that, because later on in the late 1800s, by our families marrying to the Williams family, the land that was called was an island, a small island. It's called Brewer's Island, and that land later belonged to Don's family, who was connected to the Williams family. We're both connected to cousin Vivian Dotson Hall. So man, there's so many things that intertwine that we haven't talked about, because it would be great to have more people on here from those different areas. Inez Bouyer is an excellent resource to connect with that area down there, because her family are Bouyers. And they just found out a few years ago from the French, they have a crown, a French crest. They need to talk about it. So along with telling those who
that might add,
connecting with the schools, like we're doing, we have to continue doing that. I've been asked by the superintendent to do certain things. I'm going to keep doing things because if we say no, they can say we asked and they didn't respond. But we have so much to add. So this, our 15-year relationship with the school system has to maintain. We're going to do that.
Yeah, we should say again that we are currently working with Hancock's resolution, which includes the wishing rock for anybody who grew up along Ritchie Highway. So that's an active project, and we certainly invite everybody to help with that project. They are in the process of planning for the building of a Severn Community Center, and they are looking for people to get involved in that process. There's a lady who has advocated for the center for 30 years, and the money, I understand, has been committed, and sometimes during this year, they expect to break ground.
and along with, you know, the Deltas and the AKAs and the Jack and Jills and all of that, the women who have been very instrumental in getting our kids through and educating and all of that, 52 women's social groups have been identified. I'd like to be able to get with folks to celebrate that story. And it might be something we could do with one of the schools. In the slide was the quilt with American Women Making a Difference.
First of all, I enjoyed tonight and I learned so much. I come from North Carolina and I wish I had access to this much information because all my family history is there. And so I'm doing this, as Mrs. Mack and Mr. Mack knows, I'm doing this to trace my family history. So you all are giving me ideas that I can work with my former neighbors and my family down there for the community. But the quilt is absolutely gorgeous. I have, from what I can see here, I have not seen it in person. Mrs. Mack and Mr. Mack have talked about the quilt. It is good to see you, Patricia Caldwell, Tony Spencer, everyone. You know, I see you all always doing the work. Linda Davis was here. So just thank you so much for this work. And yes, I agree. I want an encore. We need, you know, more. And you know, NACAC knows that if you need me, even if you don't need me, I'm here to help and to provide as much information and as much state dollars as I can do within my power. I want to make sure we keep our Rosenwald schools intact. In fact, I had to give the Black History moment for the Legislative Black Caucus this week, and it was on the Rosenwald schools. And I urged all the Black legislators to look up the Rosenwald schools in their areas and to put in a legislative bond initiative to help improve the Rosenwald schools. So, so yeah, so there we go.
Maybe a special one this year since that bill was just passed.
Magazine?
I didn't hear you.
It would be. No, I said maybe a special one this year since the bill was passed in Congress just in December.
HR 3250. Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, I didn't know.
Yes, I think
yes.
I sent that to you.
Yeah.
I think.
You might have sent it to me, Ms.
Yeah.
Mack, but I probably hadn't read it yet. So HR 3250?
Yes, it's 32, HR 3250 requires that the Secretary of the Interior has to conduct a special resource study on the sites that are associated with the Rosenwald schools.
Well, you know what?
They're looking at suitability and feasibility.
That is wonderful. And that gives us,
allowing them to be a part of the national park system.
yeah, that gives more validity to what I was saying. Just I think we had our meeting on Thursday. And so yeah, I'll keep blowing the trumpet for the schools and any other artifacts and architectural presence.
We're going to close out the event. I want to thank NACAC, all the speakers and everyone who was just on the call for your participation. We will be in contact soon for future events as well. I want to thank Denise Hall for putting the slideshow together. We literally dumped a lot of photos in her inbox yesterday and overnight, so I really appreciate her putting that together as well. And also my co-lead, Deidre, for all of your support for this effort. So thank you all and have a wonderful evening.
You too.
Yeah, kudos
Thanks
to you.
everyone.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Julie.